Zara Aleena was the kind of person everyone remembered, quiet, brilliant, and full of promise. Marcus Dean was a forgotten man, drifting through life with nothing but resentment in his pockets. Leah Morgan was once Zara's closest friend, but jealousy had turned her heart cold. None of them were supposed to cross paths again. But on one summer night, their worlds collided in a way that left one woman dead, another complicit, and a killer on the run. This is the chilling story of how obsession, betrayal, and silence ended in tragedy, and how the truth was buried deeper than anyone could have imagined. Zara Aleena left her best friend's apartment just after 10 on a warm July evening. The night air was quiet, with a soft breeze moving the tree branches as streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. She walked confidently, familiar with every turn of the neighborhood. Her home was less than 15 minutes away, a straight shot through Oakmere Lane. She had walked it dozens of times before, never thinking twice. That night, she had spent hours laughing, celebrating a new chapter in her life, a long-awaited promotion at the law firm where she worked. She was known for her discipline, her warmth, and her unshakable kindness. As she walked, she sent a short message to her aunt, "On my way home." That would be the last anyone ever heard from her. The next morning, as the sun rose and Glenridge began to stir, a jogger running his usual route stumbled upon something that would change everything. At first glance, it looked like a pile of clothes discarded near the sidewalk. But as he got closer, the horror of the scene became clear. It was a woman, lying face down, motionless. Her body was bruised and blooded. There were signs of a violent struggle. Her hands were scraped, her lips split, and the area around her was disturbed, as though she had tried to fight back. Her phone lay shattered nearby. Her shoes were gone. Within the hour, the police arrived, cordoning off the area. Neighbors gathered, stunned and whispering. No one had heard a thing. No screams, no sounds of a struggle. It was as if she had vanished into silence. Zara's ID was found in her pocket. Within hours, her family was notified, and the media quickly picked up the story. A young, successful woman found murdered on her way home in a quiet neighborhood. It was unthinkable. The police launched an immediate investigation, but there were no eyewitnesses. There were no cameras in that stretch of the street. The only footage available showed Zara walking down the main road minutes before her death, alive and alone. Detectives canvassed the area, speaking to residents and asking about any unusual activity. A few remembered seeing a shadowy figure standing near a bus stop the night before, but no one had paid much attention. It had been late, and people tend to keep to themselves. The medical examiner's report was grim. Zara had died from blunt force trauma to the head and face, consistent with a physical assault. There was no evidence of sexual assault or robbery, further deepening the mystery. Her purse, wallet, and jewelry were still on her body. Whoever had attacked her had done it for reasons other than theft. It was deliberate, calculated. Cold.as The days passed. Zara's story made headlines. A candlelight vigil was held in her memory. Her family appeared on local news, pleading for answers. But behind the scenes, investigators were struggling. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no clear motive, and worst of all, no suspect. Zara Aleena had walked home alone. Somewhere along the way, someone had been waiting. The investigation into Zara Aleena's murder began with urgency, but very quickly, detectives realized they were working with almost nothing. The neighborhood of Glenridge was a quiet, residential area with very little foot traffic after dark. Oakmere Lane, the road where Zara was found, had no surveillance cameras. Streetlights were spaced far apart, and there were no nearby businesses with external security systems that could have captured anything useful. What few home security cameras existed were either pointed inward or were not recording at the time. Zara's route should have been safe, but it had become a blind spot, a dark stretch where someone had taken advantage of the silence. Detectives retraced her steps from the apartment she had left that night. They spoke with a friend, who confirmed Zara had left in good spirits and had refused a ride home. It was something she often did. Zara believed in independence. She walked the same route regularly, trusting her neighborhood. Her phone showed no calls or messages out of the ordinary, only the short text to her aunt saying she was on her way home. That message was sent at 10:14 p.m. Her body was discovered at 5:42 a.m. the next morning. Somewhere in that 7-hour window, everything had gone wrong. Door-to-door inquiries yielded few results. One neighbor claimed to have seen a figure standing on the opposite side of the street just after 10 o'clock, but couldn't give a clear description. Another mentioned a stray dog barking around that time, something it rarely did. It wasn't much. What stood out most to detectives was that nothing had been stolen. Zara still had her watch, her earrings, and even cash in her wallet. That ruled out robbery. The ferocity of the attack suggested rage, but there was no one in Zara's life known to be violent or angry toward her. She was well liked, respected at work, and close to her family. There was no history of harassment, no ex-partners with grudges, and no disputes at her job. The crime scene offered little hope. The body had been exposed overnight, and any trace evidence was compromised by weather and time. Forensics collected everything they could: scrapings from under her fingernails, soil samples, fabric fibers, but there was no immediate hit in any national database. Police examined her phone and laptop, but nothing stood out. No disturbing messages, no secret accounts, no signs of online threats. It was as if she had simply walked into the path of a predator no one knew existed. Pressure on the investigators grew as media coverage intensified. The public demanded answers. A reward was offered, tip lines were opened, but most of the information coming in was vague or useless. Rumors spread fast, theories even faster. Some suggested it was a random attack, others believed it had to be someone who had studied her routines. But without a name, without even a face, the case had begun to stall. Behind closed doors, investigators feared the worst, that the killer had come and gone like a shadow, leaving nothing behind. 3 weeks after Zara Aleena's murder, the case remained without a suspect, and leads had all but dried up. Investigators found themselves circling the same questions with no new answers. But everything changed one afternoon when a teenage boy exploring the wooded edge of a park near Oakmere Lane stumbled upon something strange caught in a storm drain. At first, it looked like trash, just a dark, wet bundle of fabric. But curiosity led him to pull it free. What he held was a black hoodie, torn at the shoulder and damp from recent rain. Something about it didn't feel right, so he turned it over to police. Forensic teams rushed to examine the hoodie, and under a layer of grime and dried mud, they discovered traces of blood on the inner lining. Initial tests confirmed the worst: it was Zara Aleena's blood. The discovery electrified the investigation. For the first time, they had physical evidence possibly worn by the killer. Inside the front pocket of the hoodie, police found a faded bus ticket, dated the night of the murder. The timestamp was 10:49 p.m., just over 30 minutes after Zara's last text message. It was a single clue, but it cracked open a new door. Police tracked down surveillance footage from the bus line, hoping the onboard cameras had recorded something useful. Though the image quality was poor, a man could be seen boarding the bus at a stop not far from the crime scene. His face was partially covered, and he appeared to be limping. His clothing matched the description of the hoodie found in the drain. Using enhancements and facial recognition software, authorities were able to identify him as Marcus Dean, a 34-year-old man with a history of minor crimes and drug offenses. He had no connection to Zara Aleena on paper, no shared friends, no common workplaces. But his record showed a pattern of instability and arrests for trespassing and disorderly conduct. When police tried to locate him, they learned that Marcus had disappeared from his last known address 2 days after the murder. His apartment, a rundown unit in a nearby neighborhood, was abandoned. Neighbors hadn't seen him since. Inside the apartment, police found more than they expected. One wall had been covered with newspaper clippings, articles about Zara's promotion, photos of her from online news pieces, and a printout of her law firm's website. It was immediately clear that Marcus had been watching her. Obsession had grown in the shadows, unnoticed. Though it wasn't enough to confirm guilt, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Detectives now believed Zara had been targeted. Not by a stranger in passing, but by someone who had studied her, followed her, and planned his moment. A quiet predator who had slipped into her path unnoticed. The manhunt for Marcus Dean officially began. His face was released to the public. Tips began pouring in, but none of them led anywhere useful. He had vanished. And until he was found, justice for Zara would remain out of reach. As the manhunt for Marcus Dean intensified, investigators began piecing together his life in the weeks leading up to Zara Aleena's murder. He had been living in the area for several months, mostly unnoticed. Records showed he had briefly worked as a night janitor in the same building where Zara's law firm was located, but he had been fired after just 2 weeks for erratic behavior. It seemed like a meaningless detail at first, until former co-workers recalled him asking about the employees in the building, particularly the women who stayed late. One receptionist remembered him staring for long periods, saying nothing. Another said he often waited in the lobby after his shift, watching people leave. No one reported it at the time. It hadn't seemed serious. Now, it looked chilling. Detectives theorized that Marcus had fixated on Zara during her late evenings at the office. She often stayed behind to finish work, and while she was always polite, she likely didn't even notice him. But for Marcus, those brief, passing interactions may have been enough to spark something dangerous. Obsession, once ignited, had festered in silence. He had collected information, built a fantasy, and eventually convinced himself that he knew her. That she was part of his story. More evidence surfaced to support this. Surveillance from a gas station 2 blocks from Zara's apartment captured Marcus walking by at least 4 different times during the 2 weeks before the murder, always at night, always alone. He had been scouting her route, waiting for the right moment. On the night of the attack, there were no signs of forced entry, no calls for help. He had followed her quietly, choosing a stretch of road without cameras, where the streetlights were dim. Then he had struck and disappeared. As the media picked up more of the story, the public reaction turned from sadness to anger. A young woman had been hunted in her own neighborhood, and the man responsible was still free. Police released Marcus Dean's photograph to news outlets and placed him on a regional watch list. Days passed. Then, without warning, he surfaced. In another state, Marcus walked into a small-town police station hundreds of miles from Glenridge and told the front desk clerk that he might be wanted for something. He was thin, pale, and visibly distressed. When questioned, he admitted to following Zara but claimed he had no memory of what happened the night she died. He said he blacked out and woke up with blood on his hands and a torn hoodie. He insisted it wasn't murder. Just a moment he didn't understand. Police took him into custody immediately. But his partial confession wasn't enough. He didn't admit to the killing outright. There was no DNA evidence tying him directly to the attack, only the hoodie and the circumstantial pieces surrounding his obsession. Investigators feared the case could still unravel. Without a witness, without proof beyond doubt, the trial could fail. Then, unexpectedly, another piece of the puzzle fell into place, from someone much closer to Zara than anyone had realized. With Marcus Dean in custody but unwilling to fully confess, investigators continued building their case. They combed through every contact he had, every place he'd been, every conversation he'd had online. One connection stood out, a woman named Leah Morgan. Her name hadn't come up before, but her messages with Marcus went back several months. They had exchanged hundreds of texts, some of which mentioned Zara's name in chilling, casual tones. Leah was not just an acquaintance, she had once been Zara's roommate. Leah and Zara had lived together for 2 years before parting ways amicably. Or so it had seemed. Their lives had gone in different directions. Zara had focused on her career, while Leah had struggled with unemployment and a failed relationship. At the time, no one suspected bitterness. But the messages between Leah and Marcus painted a different picture. Leah had met Marcus through an online recovery forum. What began as support turned into long, obsessive conversations about feeling powerless, overlooked, and wronged. Somewhere along the way, Leah had spoken of Zara not just as a friend, but as a symbol of everything she had failed to become. Detectives uncovered a disturbing exchange just days before the murder. Leah had written, "She walks around like nothing can touch her. Maybe it's time someone reminded her." Marcus had replied, "Just say the word." Though the conversation wasn't explicit, it carried a heavy implication. Investigators brought Leah in for questioning. At first, she denied everything. But when shown the messages and surveillance footage placing her at a hardware store the day after the murder, purchasing gloves, bleach, and garbage bags, her story began to change. Eventually, Leah confessed, but not to the murder itself. She admitted to knowing Marcus planned to confront Zara. She claimed she didn't take him seriously and thought he was just venting. But when he showed up at her door the next morning, bloody and panicked, she helped him. She let him shower. She burned his clothes. She hid the hoodie in the storm drain. She didn't ask questions and she didn't call the police. Prosecutors now had enough to move forward. Marcus was charged with first-degree murder, while Leah was charged as an accessory after the fact. During the trial, both showed little emotion. Marcus maintained that he couldn't remember the attack, insisting he had only wanted to talk. Leah said she regretted her actions but denied encouraging violence. The jury didn't believe them. Marcus was sentenced to life without parole. Leah received 15 years in prison. The courtroom was packed the day the verdict was read. Zara's family sat in the front row, holding photos of her smiling face. Justice, though long delayed, had finally come. But the pain of loss never faded. Zara had done everything right, worked hard, lived kindly, walked home through a neighborhood she trusted. And yet, her life was taken by people who had silently turned their bitterness into something deadly. In the end, her story became a reminder: behind some of the quietest smiles hide the darkest intentions.